United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights has strongly condemned Iran's handling of nationwide protests, accusing authorities of a deadly and escalating crackdown. Addressing an emergency session of the UN Human Rights Council on Friday, Volker Turk said thousands of people, including children, have been killed as security forces intensified their response to demonstrations earlier this month. Turk warned that the use of live ammunition against protesters has only deepened the crisis, insisting that repression will not resolve Iran's underlying problems, but instead fuel further instability and human rights abuses. He called on Tehran to immediately end what he described as brutal repression of its citizens.
I call on the Iranian authorities to reconsider, to pull back, and to end their brutal repression, including summary trials and disproportionate sentences. I call for the immediate release of all those arbitrarily detained by the Iranian authorities.
As pressure mounts on Tehran, U.S. President Donald Trump says the United States is significantly increasing its military presence in the Middle East. Speaking aboard Air Force One after returning from the World Economic Forum in Davos, President Trump said an American armada is heading towards the region, stressing that Washington is closely monitoring developments in Iran. The comments come as activists place the death toll from Iran's protest crackdown at more than 5,000. U.S. officials say the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln, along with several guided missile destroyers, will arrive in the Middle East in the coming days. Additional air defense systems are also being deployed, while the United Kingdom has confirmed it will send RAF Eurofighter Typhoon jet to Qatar at Doha's request.
But we have an armada. We have a massive fleet heading in that direction, and maybe we won't have to use it. We'll see. Well, it's really a negotiation, but it's infinity. The time limit is infinity, meaning there is no time limit. It's forever. It's, you hear about 99 years, 50 years. It's forever. That was discussed. We can do anything we want. We can do military. We can do anything we want. And it's being negotiated, and let's see what happens. I think it'll be good. It's all good. Anytime we meet, it's good. If you don't meet, nothing's going to happen. I mean, for the first 3 years, nobody met. Under Biden, nobody met. And you know one thing, if you don't meet, nothing's going to happen. So we are meeting, and we'll see what happens. I hope we can save a lot of lives. And so, well, right now, they're very strong leadership. I mean, they're showing very strong leadership. I also spoke with Maria today, and who I like a lot. But Elsie's showed very strong leadership so far, I have to say. And we're moving in, to the United States, millions of barrels of oil as we speak. You know that. You see it. You see what's happening. Over 50 million barrels of oil is already moved or moving into the United States, and much more to come. And we're working with them, and they'll get some of that, and we're going to get some of that.
Now, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has delivered one of his strongest public rebukes yet of Europe's leadership, accusing the European Union of lacking the political will needed to confront Russia and end the war in Ukraine. Now, speaking at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Zelensky warned that Europe risks irrelevance if it remains divided and hesitant even as the war grinds on. Now, the speech came just minutes after Zelensky met with United States President Donald Trump, a meeting he says produced a breakthrough on post-war security guarantees for Ukraine, even though details remain disclosed. As Washington pushes for an end to the conflict and Moscow tightens its grip on eastern Ukraine, questions are mounting about Europe's role, Ukraine's territorial future, and whether diplomacy is overtaking battlefield realities. Today, we examine what Zelensky's fiery remarks mean for Ukraine's allies, the balance of power in Europe, and the path towards ending the war. Now, to unpack this, I'm now joined by a geopolitical analyst, Yemi Fajemising. Thank you so much, Mr. Fajemising, for joining. I'd like to know, President Zelensky accused the EU of lacking political will. Is this a fair assessment, or is Europe constrained by internal politics and especially also competing national interests?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I think what Zelensky said there is kind of he's frustrated, to be honest, because the war has been going on for quite a while, and is trying to press Europe to do more in terms of weapon assets, the frozen assets anyway, to go further basically to help Ukraine. The problem here is Europe can't do these things alone. They need the help of the United States in order to really help Ukraine, which the United States has been helping to an extent. But Zelensky is frustrated because he wanted more. And Europe, as traditionally, Europe is kind of the cautious. Europe is cautious. They don't rush into things. Even President Macron said during the Davos that Europe is known to be cautious. They need a reform. Yes, they need a reform. So it's pretty much normal, the frustration as Zelensky is profiling to say Europe lacks the political will to get things done. Europe, on the other hand, can't do it alone. They need the help of the U.S. in order to fully support Ukraine. They need things like air defense missile, like the Patriot system. The U.S. have access to. We all know the U.S. is got the most sophisticated military might on the planet. So it's not a question of political will from Europe. The political will is there to help Ukraine. The problem is Europe can't do these things alone. There's so much complexity around it. We're looking at the situation of security guarantees as well. Zelensky wants Europe to go fast enough, but Europe, they're kind of taking their time. They're negotiating with the Americans as well as to helping Ukraine. That's one of the reasons why we have a meeting going on now in UAE with President Putin, with the U.S. envoy, Witkoff, and Jared Kushner as well. So we can only see, time will tell the details of that meeting, maybe in a few days' time.
I'll look at the details of Zelensky's speech. He said he described Europe as a beautiful but fragmented kaleidoscope. How damaging is this fragmentation?
Yeah, the fragmentation is there because we need to recognize that European Union consists of over 20 countries. So it's a kind of a big deal for everybody to come together to reach like a form of consensus in terms of Ukraine. I'll give you an example. Europe had a discussion around using Russian frozen assets to help Ukraine, to fund Ukraine maybe after the war. Even within the members of the European Union, there were disagreements. Belgium was skeptical about using the Russian frozen funds to help Ukraine. Belgium is skeptical because of the legal implications that may arise on the back of that. So it's one thing to say, yeah, Europe is fragmented, but we also need to recognize the realities on ground, that it's not easy. And we need to also recognize that we're talking about NATO as well and around the security guarantees for Ukraine. Zelensky, I understand why he's a bit frustrated. This war has been going on for a while. We're in a winter period as well, where Russia is shelling Ukraine. And Russia is shelling Ukraine because they're taking advantage of the winter season to make Ukrainians freeze to death, if possible. So what they've been doing is they've been attacking all the energy infrastructure of Ukraine just to make life very unbearable for Ukrainians. So I get where Zelensky is coming from. He's frustrated, and we can only see what comes on the back of the meeting. But I would say the Americans are the ones really driving these things. Are they going to be playing a big part as to what will happen in due course?
Now, talking about the U.S.'s role in all of this, right? Zelensky says post-war U.S. security guarantees are done and ready for ratification. What might these, guarantees realistically include, and how significant are they for Ukraine's long-term security?
Yes, a good question. The sticking point out of all these negotiations that's been going on back and forth between the European Union, Ukraine, and America revolves around the security guarantees. And on paper, what everybody is saying that they want the security guarantee itself, what basically that means is a framework that was going to deter Russia from reinvading Ukraine again. So we want a framework that's going to prevent Russia from coming back again. So that's the whole logic about these things. And what people are saying on paper is they want like Article 5 kind of guarantee. Article 5 means it's a NATO guarantee, which means attack on one member state is an attack on all member states. So that's the kind of framework they're discussing for Ukraine. However, Russia is saying they don't want that. So Russia also have their red lines of they don't want any troops or any NATO troops around Ukraine. So we don't know as of yet what the security guarantee is actually going to look like. Is it going to be a case of European Union deploying their troops in Ukraine or training them? So we don't know. That's one of the discussions. That's one of the things that's currently being fleshed out in maybe UAE as we speak. One thing that could happen, though, in terms of security guarantee is to strengthen the Ukrainian army and to make them really powerful as much as possible. The problem with that is one of the demands of Russia involves putting a cap on the Ukrainian army. So what that means, Russia wants a total capitulation of Ukraine. So that's one of the complexities. So in terms of security guarantee, we don't know for sure what that would look like. But what we're hoping for is to have something close to Article 5 of NATO, which means attack on one is an attack on all. No. Maybe not exactly the same, but something similar.
All right, so President Trump says that this war has to end. He has made that clear, while also signaling, limited patience with Europe. Is the U.S. now driving the peace process, and what does that mean for the EU's influence?
Yes, the U.S. is a big deal when it comes to security guarantees. Even with the U.S. is like the backbone of NATO, and NATO obviously we know was formed after the World War. So for the how do I put it? Because the NATO is being forced to raise defense spending by the Americans as well. So which adds a bit of more complexity to those. So the Americans are saying we're going to help Ukraine, but we need you to spend more. So what the US has been doing now is they've been supplying Ukraine the weapons, but they're not doing it directly. They're doing it through NATO. So NATO buys the equipment from the US and the NATO supplies to Ukraine. So the Americans, whether sadly or unfortunately or unfortunately, we're still going to be playing a big role in terms of peace, in terms of security guarantees. And that's one of the reasons why it seems like the European Union, Europe has been capitulating to Trump. And that, if you remember the case of the Greenland issue where Trump is threatening tariffs on European Union to have Greenland. So a lot of people have been frustrated. One of the reasons why the European Union have been cautious is because of all these guarantees around Ukraine. So the United States is actually very vital when it comes to security guarantees for Ukraine. And that's the way we stand. And that's why the negotiation is going between right now in the UAE as to forging a peace plan. So time will tell how things will look like.
So Zelensky admits territory, particularly the eastern Ukraine, is the unresolved issue. Can any peace deal succeed without Ukraine making territorial concessions?
Yeah, I think the problem, the issue we have with that is the United States under Trump, they've been sending mixed signals as well. So we've seen a situation where Trump administration, they've been putting a lot of pressure on Ukraine, putting a lot of pressure on European Union, but we haven't seen much pressure from the Russian side. So I suspect at some point Ukraine will have to concede some of their lands, because one problem we've got now is President Putin is not going to be walking away thinking he's losing the war, and he's not really ready to negotiate now because he thinks he's winning. He thinks he's got the US on his side. So he needs to show something to the people, to the world, that he's won something. And doing that will be Ukraine conceding some of their land. The problem for Ukraine, however, is they've lost thousands of soldiers that's died on these lands. So how are they going to market it to their people to say we conceding these lands soldiers died and fought for? And also Ukraine will argue that for them to do that, they will need to consult the people and perhaps maybe adjust their constitution or do a referendum of sort. They will need to say they need a permission from their people to do that. So there are a lot of complexities around these things. But I suspect Ukraine will sadly have to consider surrendering some of their lands to Russia. And one thing I think the Ukrainians will be worried about as well is if they end up giving out their land in eastern Ukraine to the Russians, is that going to be a pretext for Russia to invade in future? And that brings us back to the question of the security guarantees. So there's a lot of events unfolding as we go. But in the end, Ukraine will have to give up something because Russia is not going to, they need something to say to their people that the war was worth it after all. So for the sake of peace, I suspect the Americans they're going to try to force the Ukrainians to concede some of their land. So we can only see as time goes by.
Now, with Russia occupying about 20% of Ukrainian territory and diplomacy is, of course, intensifying, are we closer to peace or simply a frozen conflict with, long-term consequences for both Europe and even global security?
Yeah, the best way to answer that question will be to ask another question in the context of peace is almost guaranteed if both sides want to talk and if both sides want peace. The problem we've got now is Ukraine clearly wants to talk. They want peace desperately. Russia does not want peace. So Russia has not changed any of their demands. What Russia is saying that they want total capitulation of Ukraine. They haven't even moved any goalposts. They've been sticking to what they've been demanding for. And that's where things are holding up now. So you've got one side that wants peace. You've got one side that's not interested in peace. Because Russia now thinks they're winning the war. They think they've got Americans on their side as well. And the European unions are saying that's anathema to them. So you've got the European Union that's saying they're against Russia, and you've got Ukraine that really wants peace. So that's where we are now. To me, I think in the end, something will have to give. And it definitely will have to be around Ukraine giving up some of their lands, unfortunately.
So I'd like to, earlier you said that, the fact that Europe is probably slowing things down or trying to negotiate because they're probably depending on America to come through. Is this a case of the fact that Europe doesn't have enough capacity to face Russia?
They do. Europe has the capacity to face Russia to an extent, but there are some, they need the U.S. help in terms of some sophisticated military gears. Like the example I give, like the defense system, air defense system called the Patriot, which is very unique and very effective in terms of intercepting missiles that Europe doesn't necessarily have all this sophisticated stuff. So they need the help of the US to do things like that to help Ukraine. And we know Russia has got the help of the Chinese, although the Chinese are not going to admit it. So we suspect the Chinese are helping. Russia also use a lot of mercenaries as well, and they're funding from North Korea. So they got all this, and Russia, we all know, is a nuclear-armed state. Right. So they got all these tools in their toolbox to deter Europe, and Russia also is a very vast country.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Yemi Fajemi Singh, for having this conversation with us.
Thank you for having me.